Thank you so much. It's really nice to be in a room with lots of Zakens. And, one thing I always share here, I live here in the Bay Area, is that everyone with the last name Zaken came from the same place in Zacho, even went to the same synagogue in Zacho. And it's nice to be around people with who pronounce our names and say our names correctly. So that's great. So I grew up in Oakland, California. My dad was also born in Zacho and came to Israel in the early 50s. And I moved back to Israel when I was 13. So I kind of have a hybrid identity. And when growing up in my Jewish day school, I was kind of really proud to be different and Sephardic and share my Kurdish traditions that my dad was emphasizing. And then when I moved back to Israel, I was able to kind of reconnect. And one of the things that my dad shared a lot of were stories, folk tales. And I was really happy when Mira asked me to share a folk tale, just because I think there's a lot of power in these stories. And before I share the story, I wanted to share a text. So I worked for about a decade at a Beit Midrash in Jerusalem called Mimizrach Shemesh. And the whole point of that organization was to really push forward the wisdom and Jewish sources of Sephardic rabbis and use them as tools for social change. And one of the texts that I learned at Mimizrach Shemesh was a midrash, an interpretation of an interpretation of an interpretation. There's a midrash, I think it's from the Midrash Rabbah, that asks the question, why were the Jews saved from Egypt? Like, what did they do to deserve to be saved? Why did God decide to save them? And the Midrash says, "Shelo shinu et shmam velo shinu et leshonam," that they didn't change their names and they didn't change their language. And Harav Bakshi Doron, who is not Kurdish, but who was chief Sephardic rabbi, kind of interprets that Midrash, and he says that what really kept the Jewish people, what it really meant, like that they didn't change their language and they didn't change their culture, is that the Torah of the mothers was kept. Like, all of the traditions of the home were kept. And that's what kept the Jewish people. And that's why God, even when they were slaves, they were still passing down their heritage from generation to generation. And God was like, oh, these people know how to keep themselves, so I'm going to save them. And so I think it's really important to think about that when we hear folk tales. They're Torah. They're not less than Torah. They have strength. And our mothers told them. My grandma Zilpa probably told the story I'm going to share with you to my dad. And so I think it's great to hold up the voices of these of our homes, of our Jewish homes that unlike halacha, are a bit more accessible. Halacha meaning Jewish law. So I'm going to tell my story. It's about a mother and two daughters, and they're very poor. They're living, I guess, in Zacho or somewhere in Kurdistan, and they have a flock of sheep. And every day, a different sister goes out to watch the flock of sheep. And while the one day, the first sister goes out, the older sister, she goes out and she, actually, I don't know if it's the older sister. I'm just adding that. It could have been the younger sister. And so as she's watching the sheep, she's knitting a sweater, and she's knitting, and all of a sudden a wind comes and takes her knitting from her hand, and she runs after the wind, and she swears at the wind, and she says, "Horrible wind." And I don't know what swear word she was saying in Kurdish, but I grew up on those too. And she was angry, and she was running after the wind. And the wind took her knitting into a cave. And in the cave, she finds an old woman. And the old woman says to the young girl, please help me, please sit with me and make me some food and spend some time with me. I'm lonely. And the girl was very angry at her. And she said, no, I'm not going to help you. Give me my knitting. And so the old woman says, okay, go into this room and your knitting is in there. And in the room, there was lots of gold and jewels, and she took her knitting, and I think she took a few of the jewels too, and she left the cave. And when she left, her face became ugly, and she came home, and she was kind of, I guess, cursed in a way by that. And so the next day, the next sister, a different sister, the either younger or older sister, was also out, and she was knitting, watching the sheep. And again, the wind came, and this sister was nice, and she said, please, beautiful wind, please give me back my knitting. And the wind didn't listen, and she ran after the wind, and the wind took the knitting into this cave. And in the cave, she met the old woman. And again, the old woman asked, can you please help me and spend time with me? And the young girl made her some soup and spent the whole afternoon with her and made her feel welcome at home. And then again, the woman said, okay, well, you can take your knitting. It's in this room. And the girl just took the knitting. She didn't take any of the jewels, and she left the cave. And at that moment, when she left the cave, her face became like glowed with light. And when she came into the house, her mom was like shocked because the whole house filled with light. And because something changed in this young girl, the prince of that town or of that kingdom or whatever it was heard about her and asked for her hand in marriage. And so the way that they would do, the kind of lead up to the wedding, I understand in Kurdistan, was that the groom would lead the bride on a white horse to the chuppah. And so and because this was the prince of the town or of the kingdom, the king or the prince put the woman, the young girl, with a veil on her on top of this white horse, and walked through the whole town, and all of the townspeople came out and celebrated and sang on the occasion of the wedding. But as they were walking, they kept hearing like a weird sound, and it was like, Zalohi, Zalohi, it's not her. It's not her. They kept hearing, the prince kept hearing this, and he was like looking around, and he didn't know where that sound was coming from. And he saw that there was like a bird. There was a rooster that was saying this. It's not her. It's not her. And the rooster was standing on top of a tabun. There was like a kind of a community oven, and the rooster was standing on top of this community oven, and so the prince stopped and said, like, what's going on? And so the rooster said, she's in here. And he opened up the community oven. It was like a circle made out of kind of rocks, and it had a metal top to it. And he opened it up, and he saw that inside was the beautiful daughter, the beautiful girl the second one who did the mitzvot and was nice to the old lady, and who got blessed when she left the cave. And then he took the veil off, and he saw that the girl on the horse was her older sister. And so he banished the sister and the mother who had kind of organized this trick. And he married the beautiful one. And yes, it is like Rachel and Leah. There are some interesting Torah influences to this story. So that is one of the stories that my dad told me. And I think it's really important to keep telling these stories. And I'm so glad, Ilana, that you brought Yona Sabar after the Seharaneh we did last year. I've been connecting with him just to seep up his wisdom. So important to keep telling these stories. Thank you.